Austin, Texas glowed beneath the fading light, a city caught somewhere between ambition and ease. Orion Hayes moved through his evening routine with the practiced grace of a man who had grown used to carrying too much alone. The sign outside his modest clinic, Phoenix Therapy, was gently flickering in the warm dusk, a silent invitation to the troubled and weary. Inside, the place felt more like a home than a business, a haven carved out with careful intention. Orion had learned long ago how to split himself in two, healer by day, single father by night. The air inside the clinic carried the subtle aroma of eucalyptus and old books calming the nervous and the lonely alike. A telescope in progress stood in the corner of his office, half assembled, its pieces spread on a table beside a hand-drawn star map colored in by his daughter Lyra. Tonight, as every night, he was planning to build a little more of the universe for her. Outside, traffic hummed past. Orion checked his watch, 30 minutes until Lyra would bound in sneakers, thumping cheeks flushed from soccer practice. In those 30 minutes, he cleaned up paperwork, reset the cushions on the battered blue couch, and reflected on the choices that had brought him here. Once, not long ago, he had a promising career in medical consulting for Meridian Pharmaceuticals. Long hours, big paychecks, but a growing ache in his chest every time he missed a milestone in Lyra's young life. His wife, restless and sharp-edged, had called him unambitious and walked out, leaving behind little but an echo of her dreams and a daughter who now looked to him for everything. The phone rang, shattering the quiet rhythm of his evening preparations. Orion hesitated, glancing at his watch again. After hours, calls usually meant someone in crisis, and he never turned those away. But the clinic officially closed at 6, and Lyra would be arriving soon. The phone continued its persistent chime. With a sigh, he picked up. A clipped, efficient voice on the other end introduced herself as the personal assistant to a VIP client requiring immediate consultation. The woman spoke with the practiced tone of someone used to arranging discreet services for the wealthy. No name was offered, only the promise of generous compensation for an emergency session tonight. Orion's gaze drifted to the stack of bills on his desk. The roof repair estimate, Lyra's school tuition, increased the property tax notice. Each paper a small weight accumulating into something heavier. My daughter will be here in 20 minutes. I can't do tonight. Orion's voice was firm but apologetic, years of practice in setting boundaries without burning bridges. The woman pushed back, the amount of the consultation fee doubling, then tripling. Something in her tone suggested this wasn't the usual crisis. There was an urgency beyond money. Still, Orion held firm, offering a slot for tomorrow morning instead. After some back and forth, the assistant reluctantly accepted the earliest appointment, 7 a.m., with a note that her employer was not accustomed to waiting. Orion hung up, relief and doubt mingling in his chest. He'd turned down what would have been the most lucrative hour of his practice's history. The money would have covered half the roof. But years ago, he'd made a promise to himself and to Lyra. Time together would never be sacrificed for money again. The memory of her tiny face, disappointed at his absence from her kindergarten play, had branded itself too deeply on his heart. The front door of the clinic swung open, bringing with it a gust of evening air and the sound of Lyra's laughter as she chatted with her soccer coach who dropped her off on practice days. 9 years old with untamed curls and her mother's quick wit, Lyra was already developing Orion's observant nature. She noticed the pensive look on his face immediately. "What's wrong, Dad? Did someone sad come today?" Her backpack slid to the floor as she approached, concern etching her young features. Orion smoothed back her hair, wild from running in the Texas humidity. "Just a phone call, nothing important. How was practice?" He shifted the conversation, helping her get settled with homework at the small table in the corner of his office while he finished closing up. But Lyra's question lingered in his mind. Did someone sad come today? More than she knew, and more would come tomorrow. In his line of work, sadness was a constant companion, sitting beside every client who walked through his door. Morning came too quickly. Orion woke before his alarm, the weight of the early appointment already pressing on him. He moved quietly through the house, not wanting to wake Lyra. The coffee machine gurgled to life, its familiar sound grounding him as he prepared mentally for the day ahead. Through the kitchen window, he could see the first hint of dawn breaking over Austin, the skyline a jagged silhouette against the lightening sky. The drive to the clinic was quick in the early morning emptiness, the city not yet fully awake. As Orion pulled into his usual spot, he noticed a sleek black car already parked in the small lot, its engine off, but a driver sitting alertly behind the wheel. The kind of car and driver that spoke of serious money and serious privacy concerns. Whoever his 7 a.m. appointment was, they had arrived early and come prepared. Orion unlocked the clinic door, switching on lights and adjusting the thermostat. He brewed a fresh pot of coffee, set out water, and quickly reviewed his notes from the phone call. Very little to go on. Female client severe insomnia panic attacks requested absolute discretion. No name had been provided, which wasn't entirely unusual for high-profile clients in their first session. At precisely 6:55 a.m., the front door opened. Orion looked up from his desk to see a woman who didn't so much enter as arrive, her presence immediately commanding the space around her. She was impeccably dressed in a tailored black suit that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage payment. Dark hair pulled back in a severe style that emphasized sharp cheekbones and eyes that missed nothing. The diamonds at her wrist caught the morning light, small but flawless, much like the woman herself. Compact, perfect, and undoubtedly hard enough to cut glass. She looked almost artificial in the humble setting, like a character from another story who had somehow walked into his. She was the kind of person the world called visionary, but who had the exhausted look of someone who'd spent years running from shadows only she could see. Orion greeted her with the steady calm that was his professional signature. He gestured to the couch. She didn't sit. Instead, she moved around the room with measured steps, taking in the worn furniture, the shelves of books, the half-built telescope in the corner. Her gaze lingered on Lyra's star map before returning to him, assessing. Callista Rhodes. She finally offered the name, hanging in the air between them. No further explanation, as if those two words should provide all the context needed. And perhaps they should have. Even Orion, who deliberately stayed disconnected from the world of tech and business, recognized the name of the founder and CEO of Nexus Technologies. Her face occasionally appeared on business magazines at the grocery checkout, her company's products in homes and offices across the globe. A self-made billionaire who had built an empire in algorithms and innovation. For a long moment, she simply studied him as if running some internal calculation. Then she pulled out her phone, tapped something with brisk precision, and looked at him directly. No hesitation, no warmth. I need a trustworthy man beside me at night. Her voice was as flat as a readout. No sex, no touch, just presence. For 1 week, I will pay you $5 million. The words dropped like stones in a pond. Orion's first instinct was to laugh, but her face betrayed no hint of irony. She was deadly serious. He weighed her words, the possibilities flickering through his mind. What kind of desperation drove a person to such a transaction? What kind of loneliness? He tried to keep his voice gentle. I'm a therapist, not a bodyguard, not an escort. She met his gaze almost impatiently. I have severe insomnia and panic attacks. The nights are the worst. Silence feels like drowning. My team finds people, but they can't buy trust. I thought maybe a therapist could. 5 million 1 week. No one has to know. Her money didn't tempt him. It never did. He'd left that world behind, a world where every hour had a price and every kindness was billable. He saw for just a moment something flicker in her, a tremor beneath the polished surface, a fear deeper than panic. But his mind traveled inevitably to Lyra. Her laughter, her faith in him, the way she'd called his small home the safest place on earth. His peace wasn't for sale, and neither was his time with her. Orion stepped back and shook his head. My peace isn't for sale, and my time with my daughter is priceless. He reached into the drawer, pulled out his card, and set it gently on the table between them. If you ever need real therapy book, a session like everyone else. For the first time, Callista's composure wavered just slightly. Something unreadable passed through her eyes. Anger, disappointment, or maybe relief that someone had finally told her no. She picked up the card with mechanical precision, nodded once, and walked out, the echo of her heels lingering long after the door closed behind her. The clinic felt strangely hollow after she left. Orion stood in the silence, watching the early morning light strengthen outside the window. He could have changed his life. Millions just for sleeping in a penthouse and keeping the demons at bay for someone else. But then he thought of Lyra of the telescope and the little universe they were building together and realized some things could never be bought. He tucked Callista's business card into his drawer, not expecting to see her again, and began preparing for his regular 8 a.m. client. But as the morning progressed, his mind kept returning to her, to the tension in her shoulders and the careful emptiness in her eyes. He recognized the look. Someone whose success had become a cage, whose wealth offered everything except what she needed most. In the glass fortress of her tech empire, Callista Rhodes stared at city lights pulsing beneath her window. The world ran on data, her world most of all. Algorithms, numbers, code. They obeyed rules. People usually did too. But not Orion Hayes. His refusal replayed in her mind like a corrupt file. Unexpected, unprocessable, unsettling. She stood in her penthouse 40 floors above Austin. The city spread below her like a circuit board of light and movement. The space around her was all clean lines and emptiness. White walls, glass tables, minimalist furniture that looked designed for photographs rather than comfort. Nothing out of place, nothing personal, except for a single photograph on her desk face down. For days, she cycled through her routines, reviewing product roadmaps, signing off on merger documents, fielding questions from anxious board members. All the while, his words echoed through her head. My peace isn't for sale, and my time with my daughter is priceless. She had known rejection before. Investors, competitors, even her own family, when she walked away from the safe, privileged life they'd scripted for her. But this was different. Orion had not just rejected her offer. He had refused to put a price on the one thing she'd always assumed everyone wanted more. More money, more power, more status. For the first time in years, she felt curiosity uncoiling in her chest. A strange ache mingled with the old gnawing loneliness. Her insomnia worsened, panic attacks shadowing her sleep. She tried every hack, meditation apps, weighted blankets, new prescriptions, even her AI assistant reading soothing biographies in a voice tuned for calm. But the quiet still pressed in heavy as ever. She spent one night wandering her penthouse, another pacing the roof as wind tugged at her hair. She found herself clutching Orion's business card, tracing the simple print with her thumb. Finally, on a Tuesday morning, sharp with autumn sun, she booked a therapy session. Not for her soul, she told herself, but for the shoulder pain gnawing at her after months of stress. That was her story anyway. No mention of insomnia. No mention of the night she sat on the floor, knees to her chest, waiting for panic to pass. In his office, Orion was finishing notes on a session when the appointment notification popped up on his screen. He stared at the name for a long moment. K. Rhodes. An actual appointment through proper channels. He hadn't expected to hear from her again, certainly not like this. He cleared the rest of his afternoon, suspecting this would be more complex than a standard first session. When she arrived, Callista was almost unrecognizable from their first meeting. Gone was the severe suit, replaced by jeans and a simple blouse. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, and without her usual armor of perfection, she looked younger, almost vulnerable. She entered quietly this time, no grand arrival, just a woman stepping carefully into unfamiliar territory. The clinic was sunlit, alive with the scent of wood polish and chamomile. Orion greeted her, professional as ever, hands steady, voice calm. There was no reference to their last meeting, no trace of judgment in his manner. He led her through an initial assessment, standard questions about symptoms and history, but adapted to accommodate her obvious discomfort with personal disclosure. You said shoulder pain. Orion's question was neutral, an opening rather than a challenge. Callista nodded, tension visible in the way she held herself, among other things. Her admission came reluctantly, like a fortress lowering a single drawbridge. She lay on the treatment table as he worked, fingers expert and gentle on knotted muscles. For a while, there was only silence and the muted sound of city life outside. She tried to analyze him in the quiet, cataloging his movements, searching for signs of calculation. Instead, she felt something else, the weight of presence, of being seen and not sized up, measured, or assessed for profit. He spoke about muscles, about how the body remembers what the mind cannot bear to hold. Trauma, he explained, was not just a scar in memory. It lived in tissue, in the way shoulders hunch, jaws clench, breath shortens. His words were simple, but they seemed to open a space inside her that she'd kept barricaded for years. Callista listened, half resentful, half relieved. As her defenses began to falter, she pressed him about his life, about ambition, about whether he regretted giving up the prestige and income of his former job. She wanted to provoke him, to uncover weakness or hypocrisy, but he only smiled softly and redirected her focus back to her own tension, her own pain. The session drifted, time losing its urgency. For the first time in years, she found herself not performing, not negotiating, not defending her choices. She was just a woman on a table, breathing in, breathing out, letting go. The touch was nothing like the calculated contact of boardroom handshakes or empty social gatherings. It was steady, without expectation, its only agenda being care. She realized with a kind of wonder that she felt safe. When the treatment ended, she sat up disoriented by how different the world looked. Her shoulders ached in a new way, as if healing had begun at a depth she'd forgotten existed. She caught Orion watching her, not with hunger or judgment, but with genuine attention, the kind of person reserves for something rare and fragile. Same time next week, his question hung in the air between them, a simple offer without pressure. Callista found herself nodding before she could analyze whether this was a sound strategic decision. The silence in the room was no longer a threat, but a gentle boundary. For a few moments, she let herself breathe in it, marveling at the possibility that connection didn't always have to be transactional. She gathered her things and left with a thank you barely above a whisper, carrying the sensation of that silence out into the bright, humming world. Later, as she returned to her office, reviewing code and signing papers, she found her thoughts drifting back, not to the money or the power or the endless stream of deals that usually filled her days, but to the simple fact that for one brief hour, she had not been something to negotiate with. She had just been. That night, as she tried to sleep, the quiet of her penthouse felt different. Not less empty exactly, but softer at the edges. There was a new variable in her algorithm, one she could not predict, could not buy, could not command. And for the first time, the uncertainty did not feel like defeat, but the promise of something real. At Nexus Technologies headquarters, Corbin Shaw studied the changes in Callista's schedule with growing concern. As CFO and her former partner, in business and briefly in life, he knew her patterns better than anyone. The blocked hour on her calendar, recurring weekly with no details entered, was unlike her. Callista documented everything, controlled everything. Secret meetings were not her style unless something significant was happening. Corbin leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping restlessly against the glass surface of his desk. The merger negotiations with VerdTech were approaching a critical phase, and Callista had been oddly hesitant, asking for more time to review terms they had already discussed extensively. This wasn't the ruthlessly efficient CEO he knew, the woman who had built an empire on decisive action and calculated risk. He pulled up her calendar again, noting the address attached to the appointment. A quick search revealed a small therapy practice in a converted house on the east side of the city, far from the sleek downtown medical centers that catered to Austin's elite. Interesting. Callista had always scorned therapy, calling it paid friendship for people too weak to face reality alone. Something had changed. Corbin made a note to have his assistant gather more information about Phoenix Therapy and its owner. Knowledge was leverage, and leverage was something he might soon need. The VerdTech merger was too important to be derailed by whatever personal crisis Callista might be navigating. The board was already nervous about her recent distraction, and he had carefully cultivated those concerns, positioning himself as the steady hand should Callista falter. He closed her calendar and opened the merger documents, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Perhaps this unexpected development was exactly the opportunity he'd been waiting for. Over the next 2 weeks, Callista returned to Phoenix Therapy with increasing regularity. The shoulder pain sessions expanded into proper therapy, though neither she nor Orion explicitly acknowledged the transition. She found herself speaking about things she had never shared. The crushing loneliness at the top of her corporate mountain, the constant vigilance required to maintain control, the way success had walled her off from genuine human connection. During their third session, Orion gently probed about her sleeping habits. "You mentioned insomnia during our first encounter." His careful choice of words acknowledged their unusual beginning without dwelling on it. "How long has that been an issue?" Callista stiffened momentarily, then forced herself to relax. "For years, since Nexus went public." She offered the information like someone unused to answering rather than asking questions. Sleep became the enemy. Too quiet, too dark, too much time to think. Orion nodded, no judgment in his expression. "And the panic attacks after Corbin." Her voice dropped the name, carrying a weight she rarely allowed herself to feel. "He was my co-founder, my partner. We were, close." She paused, selecting her words with clinical precision. "He tried to force me out of my own company, called an emergency board meeting while I was at my father's funeral, claimed I was unstable, unfit to lead. I stopped him, but it was close." The memory still burned, the betrayal so complete It had altered her fundamental understanding of trust. She had survived, ousted him from his position as COO, but kept him as CFO where she could watch him. Keep your enemies closer. A business strategy that had worked but left her perpetually vigilant, perpetually alone. During these sessions, Orion learned more about Callista than perhaps anyone had in years. How she had built Nexus from nothing, fighting her way through the male-dominated tech world with a combination of brilliant innovation and ruthless determination. How she had sacrificed personal relationships, family connections, even her health in pursuit of her vision. How, having achieved unprecedented success, she now found herself trapped in a life that offered everything except peace. In turn, Callista began piecing together Orion's story through careful observation and occasional direct questions. He had been a rising star at Meridian Pharmaceuticals, providing consultation on marketing strategies for new drugs. His career had been derailed when he became a whistleblower, exposing the company's efforts to downplay serious side effects of a blockbuster medication. The legal battle had been brutal. He had lost friends, professional standing, and eventually his marriage. But he had gained something else, a sense of purpose and integrity that no corporate success could match. What Callista found most fascinating, most alien to her experience, was Orion's relationship with his daughter. She observed their interactions during an unexpected overlap when Lyra arrived early one day as her session was ending. The easy affection between them, the way Orion's entire demeanor softened in his daughter's presence, the genuine interest he took in her rambling stories about school. It was a kind of connection Callista had never experienced, not even in her own childhood. "I did a background check on you," Callista admitted during their fourth session, watching carefully for his reaction. "The whistleblower case. Meridian Pharmaceuticals. The settlement had a non-disclosure clause, but I have resources." Orion's expression remained calm, unsurprised. "I assumed you would. Did you find what you were looking for?" "I found someone who gave up millions in a promising career because he couldn't stay silent about a dangerous product. Someone who chose integrity over success." Her tone was clinically observational, but underneath ran a current of something like respect or perhaps envy. Orion met her gaze steadily. "That's the simplified version. Reality was messier. I lost my marriage, my home, most of my friends. For a while, I thought I might lose Lyra too. Her mother argued I was unstable, reckless with our family's security. The words carried old pain, but no bitterness. But you don't regret it." Callista's statement was half question, half challenge. "No." Orion's answer came without hesitation. "I can look my daughter in the eye every day. I can sleep at night. Some things are worth more than money or status." The conversation lingered in Callista's mind long after she left the clinic. She had built her life on the opposite principle, that everything and everyone had a price, that with enough money and power, any obstacle could be overcome, any person could be bought, or at least neutralized. Orion's existence challenged that fundamental assumption, and she wasn't sure whether to dismiss him as naive or consider the possibility that her own worldview might be incomplete. As Callista continued her therapy, subtle changes began to manifest in her daily life. She slept a little better, though still far from well. She found herself pausing before making decisions that once would have been automatic, considering implications beyond profit margins and market share. She started taking evening walks through the city, observing ordinary lives with a curiosity that bordered on longing. At Nexus, her altered behavior did not go unnoticed. Her assistant Morgan watched with quiet concern as Callista began declining evening events, leaving the office before midnight, asking thoughtful questions about employees' families. These were not the habits of the driven, sometimes ruthless executive Morgan had served for 5 years. Corbin noticed, too, his suspicion growing as the mysterious appointments continued. He had assigned one of his most trusted analysts to dig deeper into Phoenix Therapy and its owner. The report on his desk confirmed his concerns. Orion Hayes, former pharmaceutical consultant turned whistleblower, now running a modest therapy practice and raising a daughter alone. More importantly, the report detailed Callista's regular visits and included photographs of her entering and leaving the clinic in casual clothes, looking nothing like the armored CEO who stalked the halls of Nexus. "What game are you playing?" Callista Corbin muttered to himself, studying the photographs. The merger negotiations were reaching a critical phase, with the VerdTech CEO pushing for concessions that the old Callista would have flatly rejected. Instead, she was asking for more time, more analysis, more consideration of long-term impacts on employees and corporate culture. It was as if someone had introduced a new variable into her decision-making algorithm, a variable that threatened the deal Corbin had spent months architecting. He closed the file and made a decision. It was time to meet this therapist and discover exactly what kind of influence he was exerting over Callista. The merger was too important to be derailed by whatever midlife crisis she might be experiencing. And if necessary, Corbin knew exactly how to neutralize threats to his plans. He'd done it before. The next therapy session ended with a sense of calm that Callista had almost forgotten was possible. As she sat up, letting the last traces of tension slide from her shoulders, the clinic door burst open, the room suddenly filled with the unmistakable sound of a child's laughter. Lyra Hayes bounded inside with the kind of unself-conscious joy that made adults both envious and wistful. Her cheeks were flushed, from running eyes bright beneath a mop of unruly hair, her backpack sliding dangerously off one arm. Without hesitation, Lyra ran straight into her father's embrace, the two sharing a wordless moment of reunion, the kind of hug that belonged only to those who trusted fully, without question, without past grievances. Callista, for all her success and status, felt briefly out of place, a visitor to a planet whose language she never learned. But Lyra's presence didn't allow for distance. She looked up, noticing Callista for the first time, and studied her with a frankness only children possess. "Why do you look so sad?" The question was not cruel, just observant, yet it sliced through Callista's defenses more efficiently than any adult interrogation ever could. She managed a small, awkward smile, unsure how to answer. The truth was, she didn't know how not to be sad anymore. The feeling was as much a part of her as her name. Orion, noticing the shift, gently introduced them. "Callista, this is Lyra, my universe." The pride in his voice was obvious, his love unguarded. Lyra, beaming, held up a paper Saturn, a school project constructed from colored foam paper clips and a lot of tape. "Dad helped me make this. I wanted the rings to look real. When it spins, you can see all the colors." Her delight was infectious. Callista, a woman whose life revolved around complex data models and global projects, found herself strangely disarmed by the simplicity. The model, imperfect and lopsided, was beautiful in a way her world never allowed. She bent closer to examine it, stumbling over words of praise she rarely used. "It's impressive." The admission came awkwardly, but Lyra grinned wider, unfazed by adult hesitance. She launched into an enthusiastic explanation of how she and her father were building a real telescope piece by piece, scavenging parts from flea markets and old science kits. Callista listened, uncertain at first, then with growing fascination. It occurred to her how little she understood about the mundane wonders of childhood: making things, breaking them, failing, trying again. The world she knew demanded perfection at every turn. The Hayes' world celebrated curiosity and messy progress. As Lyra chattered, Orion turned to Callista, and with the ease of someone who'd grown comfortable with disappointment, extended a casual invitation. "Friday night, there's a food truck festival at Zilker Park. Great tacos, music. Sometimes there's even a telescope set up for stargazing. You should come by if you're free." He said it lightly, almost offhand, as if he expected nothing. Yet for Callista, the invitation felt heavier than any business proposal. She almost refused out of habit. Her mind, trained by years of risk analysis, ticked off the reasons she should say no: exposure, unpredictability, wasted time. But something about the room, about Lyra's bright eyes and Orion's patient gaze, stilled her objections. For once, she allowed herself not to calculate every outcome. She nodded quietly, surprising even herself. "Maybe I will." Later, returning to her penthouse, Callista tried to process what had happened. She replayed the scene: the easy affection between father and daughter, the handmade Saturn, the unexpected invitation. She recognized her own discomfort, not just with children, but with the prospect of belonging somewhere she hadn't built or bought. In her world, trust was a rare commodity, exchanged for loyalty and calculated in contracts. Here, it seemed to flow without negotiation. That night, as she looked out over the city, the skyline glittered, impersonal as ever. Yet for the first time, she felt a gravitational pull, not to her own empire, but to something simpler and warmer. She wondered about Zilker Park, about laughter, music, and the awkward possibility of being seen not as a billionaire, but just as Callista, a woman among strangers. The prospect was terrifying and exhilarating. In the days that followed, she found herself distracted at meetings, her mind wandering from market forecasts to the memory of Lyra's blunt question, Orion's gentle pride, and the strange shifting sensation in her own chest. The Verd-Tech merger, once all-consuming, now seemed less urgent, its projected benefits less compelling when weighed against potential human costs. She requested additional impact analyses to Corbin's poorly concealed frustration. When Friday finally arrived, she stood before her closet, unsure how to dress for an evening not meant to impress or intimidate. She settled on jeans and a soft blue shirt, her usual armor of power left hanging for another night. As she left her apartment, city lights stretching into the distance, Callista felt the first flicker of anticipation in a very long time. For once, she was about to enter a world without scripts, without roles, just people, stars, and maybe if she was lucky, a chance to feel a little less alone. The evening at Zilker Park arrived on a slow tide of orange sunlight, the heat of the day giving way to a warm, forgiving dusk. Callista stood at the edge of the festival, momentarily overwhelmed by the chorus of smells and sounds that filled the air. Sizzling meat from taco trucks, bursts of laughter, the distant strum of a guitar floating over the hum of conversation. It was a world away from her penthouse. No glass walls, no bodyguards, no hushed conference calls, just families sprawled on picnic blankets, and children darting through the grass, the city skyline looking almost gentle on the horizon. The anonymity was disconcerting but strangely freeing. No one recognized her. She was just another face in the crowd, neither feared nor fawned over. The sheer ordinariness of it all felt like stepping into a dream she barely remembered having. She spotted Orion and Lyra beneath a sprawling live oak, their laughter easy, their movements relaxed. Orion waved her over, and Lyra, already munching on a taco, offered a shy, greasy smile. Callista approached, awkward at first, but Lyra patted the spot beside her as if inviting a friend, not a stranger. Callista sat, careful not to wrinkle her shirt, then let herself breathe in the moment. They ate in companionable silence, tacos bursting with flavor, the messiness of the meal forcing a kind of surrender. Callista was used to elegant, controlled dinners. Here there was no hiding behind etiquette. She let herself laugh when salsa dripped down her wrist, surprising herself with how good it felt to be imperfect in public. Music drifted from a makeshift stage, country blues, then a cover of an old folk song that seemed to hush the crowd. Lyra pulled out her paper Saturn, spinning it in the air and chattering about stars, her words tumbling over themselves in excitement. Orion listened, his eyes never straying far from his daughter, his pride soft but unwavering. Callista found herself drawn in the sharp edges of her usual thoughts, dulled by the gentle rhythm of family and community. As the sky darkened, Orion told the story of why he left his high-paying job in medical consulting. He spoke quietly, but the pain and relief in his voice were unmistakable. The endless meetings, the grueling travel, the sense that every hour was borrowed from the life he really wanted. A life where he could coach Lyra's soccer games, help with homework, and build telescopes in the living room. He'd watched his colleagues chase promotions, lose marriages, and burn out before 40. The money was good, but every day he felt his soul shrinking, his time with Lyra slipping through his fingers. Then came the revelation about Exivix Meridian's blockbuster anti-anxiety medication. Internal reports showing increased risk of stroke in younger patients, reports that marketing wanted buried, reframed, diluted with positive statistics. I realized I was helping sell a story that could hurt thousands of people just so stock prices wouldn't dip. I was teaching Lyra that success was about what you own, not who you are. That wasn't the legacy I wanted to leave her. His voice was steady, matter of fact, but the conviction behind the words was unmistakable. Callista listened, feeling the truth of his words settle into her. She was used to people talking about ambition, but never about loss, never about the cost of chasing everything. She realized how little she talked about her own pain, how well she had learned to bury it beneath spreadsheets and contracts. When Orion turned the question back to her, Callista hesitated. The festival lights flickered around them, shadows lengthening. She spoke at last, not with bravado, but with a rare kind of honesty. She told them how she'd been betrayed by Corbin, a partner she'd trusted with everything. How she learned the hard way that loyalty in her world was just another word for leverage. The fallout had been public, humiliating. She rebuilt, but never forgot the lesson. Trust could be bought, sold, and weaponized. Orion considered this, his gaze steady but kind. Maybe you were buying the wrong thing. Trust can't be bought. It has to be built. His words landed without pretense. Not a lecture, but an offering from someone who had nothing to gain. They debated softly, two worlds circling, searching for common ground. Callista, so used to winning arguments, found herself surrendering to the uncertainty, letting herself wonder if Orion might be right. The festival moved around them, children chasing fireflies, old men dancing with their wives, the smell of cinnamon churros drifting through the night. The city's energy was alive and forgiving, the kind of place where mistakes didn't feel permanent. As the music faded and the stars pressed in, Lyra begged for one last look through the telescope a local astronomy club had set up. Orion guided her, helping her find Saturn's pale ring among the constellations. Callista watched, heart thudding with a longing she'd kept at bay for years. The silence that settled was deep, but this time it was full of possibility, not panic. She realized she was no longer an outsider looking in, but a participant in something fragile and real. The night ended with a promise she did not speak, a vow to return not just to Zilker Park, but to the feeling of belonging she'd found there, beneath the wide, forgiving Texas sky. In the days following the festival, Callista found herself thinking about Orion and Lyra at unexpected moments. During board meetings while reviewing quarterly projections in the back of her car between appointments. She remembered the taste of street tacos, the sound of Lyra's laughter, the way ordinary people move through the world without armor. She found herself wanting more of that simple authenticity, even as she recognized how ill-equipped she was to seek it. At Nexus headquarters, the tension around the Vertec merger was building. The board had expected a quick decision, but Callista had ordered a comprehensive analysis of how the acquisition would affect employees at both companies. Corbin had cornered her after the last meeting, his frustration barely contained. "What's the holdup, Callista? This deal is exactly what we've been working toward. Streamlined operations, expanded market share, reduced competition. The numbers are solid." His voice carried the edge of someone unused to being questioned. Callista met his gaze coolly. "Numbers aren't people, Corbin. I want to understand the human cost before I move forward." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, then calculation. "Since when do you care about collateral damage? That's never been your style." The Callista, I know, keeps her eye on the prize, not on the feelings of middle managers who can't adapt. "Maybe I'm evolving." Her response was calm, but the underlying message was clear: back off. Corbin watched her walk away, his mind racing. This wasn't the strategic operator he'd known for years. Something or someone was changing her perspective, and he had a strong suspicion about who that might be. The therapy sessions, the new hesitancy, the sudden concern for impact beyond profit, it all started with Orion Hayes, the whistleblower, the man with principles, the threat. That afternoon, Corbin made an appointment at Phoenix Therapy under a false name, determined to assess this unexpected variable in his carefully calculated plans. The merger was too important to be derailed by whatever influence this therapist had over Callista. He would identify the threat and neutralize it, as he had done so many times before in business. Sentiment was a weakness he couldn't afford, not with so much at stake. In the days following the festival, Callista found herself thinking about Orion and Lyra at unexpected moments. During board meetings while reviewing quarterly projections in the back of her car between appointments. The world she had built with such determination was beginning to feel less like an achievement and more like a fortress that kept everything real at a distance. Meanwhile, Corbin Shaw had noticed the changes in her behavior and schedule, watching with a growing concern as the Vertec merger, once a certainty, now hung in precarious balance. Something had changed in Callista, something that threatened everything he had meticulously planned. 2 weeks after the night at Zilker Park, Corbin Shaw decided it was time to eliminate what he now saw as a direct threat to his ambitions. Rather than confronting Callista directly, he opted for a more strategic approach. Under the pretense of seeking therapy for work-related stress, he made an appointment at Phoenix Therapy, determined to assess exactly what kind of influence Orion Hayes was exerting over Nexus Technologies' CEO. The door to the therapy room opened, and a middle-aged woman emerged, nodding politely to Corbin as she passed. Orion Hayes appeared in the doorway, extending his hand with a professional smile. Nothing about his appearance suggested danger. Average height, casual clothes, the kind of unassuming presence that might blend into any crowd. Yet something in his eyes, a quiet watchfulness, put Corbin on alert. This man noticed things, assessed things, not so different from Corbin himself. Under the pretense of seeking therapy for work-related stress, Corbin allowed himself to be guided into the session room. He had prepared his cover story carefully. A finance executive struggling with anxiety, looking for techniques to manage pressure. Close enough to truth to be convincing, far enough from his real purpose to provide cover. The conversation flowed naturally at first, Orion asking standard questions about symptoms and history, Corbin providing crafted responses designed to seem authentic while revealing nothing of consequence. But as the session progressed, Corbin gradually steered the conversation toward ethical dilemmas, business conflicts, the challenges of doing the right thing in corporate America. I've been reviewing some interesting cases lately, whistleblowers, corporate ethics, that sort of thing. Meridian Pharmaceuticals came up. Nasty business with that anxiety drug. Exavix was it. Corbin watched for a reaction, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. A flicker of tension crossed Orion's face, quickly controlled, but not quickly enough. Yes, Exavix. A dangerous product rushed to market without adequate safety testing. Corbin leaned forward, the pretense of therapy falling away. You know, I did some research on you before coming here. The whistleblower who tanked his career over a few adverse reactions. Noble, I suppose, if you don't mind collateral damage. Meridian stock dropped 40% after your testimony. Thousands of jobs affected. All that turmoil over what a slightly elevated risk that was going to be disclosed eventually anyway. Orion's expression remained neutral, but his posture shifted subtly, a man preparing for conflict while maintaining professional boundaries. Was there something specific you wanted to discuss about your own situation, Mr. Wilson? The false name hung in the air between them, an increasingly thin disguise. Corbin abandoned the pretense entirely. Let's stop playing games, Hayes. I know who you are, and I know you've been seeing Callista Rhodes. Twice a week now, isn't it? Plus little social outings with your daughter. Very cozy, very unprofessional. Orion stood slowly, his movements deliberate. I think this session is over. Whatever your real name is, I'm going to have to ask you to leave, not until we understand each other. Corbin remained seated, projecting casual authority. I'm Corbin Shaw, CFO of Nexus Technologies. Callista and I have history, professional and personal. We're in the middle of negotiating a merger that will transform the industry. Billions at stake, the future of both companies. And suddenly she's distracted, hesitant, asking questions about employee impact and cultural fit. This isn't the Callista I know. Orion moved toward the door, his hand on the knob. That sounds like a conversation you should be having with Ms. Rhodes, not me. Corbin's voice hardened. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to step back from whatever you're doing with her. No more therapy sessions, no more park outings, no more influence. In exchange, your little whistleblower history stays buried. Your practice survives. Your daughter doesn't have to know Daddy almost destroyed people's lives with his self-righteousness. The threat hung between them, sharp and unmistakable. Orion's knuckles whitened on the doorknob, but his voice remained steady. Get out of my office, now. Think about it, Hayes. I found out about Meridian. What else might I find if I keep digging malpractice licensing issues? Or maybe just some juicy details about your failed marriage. Kids are so vulnerable to schoolyard gossip, aren't they? Corbin stood, straightening his suit jacket with practiced precision. I'll see myself out. We'll talk again soon. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Orion alone in the suddenly airless room. The encounter had been exactly what Corbin expected. A man with principles but limited power, vulnerable through his practice and his child. Pressure points identified and ready to be exploited. As he walked to his car, Corbin felt the familiar satisfaction of a strategic advantage secured. Callista would soon be back on track, the merger would proceed, and Orion Hayes would fade back into obscurity where he belonged. What Corbin failed to recognize was the iron that runs through the core of quiet men who have already lost everything once and rebuilt from scratch. Men who have learned that principles cost dearly, but surrender costs more. As the door closed behind Corbin Shaw, Orion made a decision that would alter the carefully balanced power dynamics more than Corbin could possibly anticipate. The following morning, Orion sat across from Callista in their regular therapy session, the weight of his decision evident in the tension of his shoulders. She noticed immediately, her analyst's mind cataloging the changes in his demeanor. The slight shadows beneath his eyes, the careful way he organized his notes, the absence of his usual calm energy. "You look like you haven't slept." The observation came with a hint of irony, given her own chronic insomnia. Orion met her gaze directly, setting aside his notebook. "There's something I need to tell you, and it may change how you feel about continuing therapy with me. Yesterday, I had a visitor. Corbin Shaw." Callista's body went rigid, her face immediately locking into the expressionless mask she wore in boardroom confrontations. What did he want? In measured words, Orion recounted the entire interaction. Corbin's threats, the merger concerns, the implied danger to both his practice and Lyra. He left nothing out, including the personal history Corbin had hinted at between himself and Callista. "I believe in transparency with my clients. You have a right to know when there are external pressures that might affect our therapeutic relationship." Callista's mind raced through implications and counter-moves, the familiar strategy game she had mastered long ago. But beneath the tactical calculations ran a deeper current of emotion: rage at the invasion, concern for Orion and Lyra, and a surprising sense of protectiveness toward the fragile connection they had begun to build. "I'll handle Corbin." Her voice was cold steel, the CEO fully present now. "He's overstepped. This will be addressed." Orion shook his head slowly. "That's not why I'm telling you this. This isn't about having you fight my battles. It's about making an informed choice about whether continuing therapy with me is in your best interest. My past with Meridian is complicated. The whistleblowing case nearly destroyed me professionally, and it did destroy my marriage. My ex-wife couldn't handle the financial uncertainty, the social isolation, the constant stress. She left while Lyra was still a toddler. The admission hung in the air between them, raw and unguarded, in a way their previous exchanges had not been." Orion continued, his voice steady despite the cost of such openness. "I've rebuilt my life around two things: being a father to Lyra and being a healer to my clients. I won't compromise either of those commitments, not even under threat. But you need to know what you're walking into if we continue working together." Callista studied him with the intensity she usually reserved for complex code or strategic problems. The world she inhabited was full of people who measured every action against personal benefit, who calculated relationships in terms of advantage and leverage. Orion's transparency made no strategic sense unless viewed through an entirely different value system, one where truth itself had worth independent of outcome. "I'm not afraid of Corbin." Her voice softened slightly, the mask slipping to reveal something more human beneath. "But I am concerned about Lyra and your practice. Corbin doesn't make empty threats." For the first time, Orion smiled, though the expression held more determination than humor. "I learned during the Meridian case that fear is a poor compass for navigating life. Doing the right thing usually comes with a cost, but doing the wrong thing costs more in ways that don't show up on balance sheets. I'm willing to face whatever consequences come from maintaining my professional integrity. The only real question is whether you want to continue our work together, knowing the complications." The session ended without a clear resolution, Callista promising to think carefully about the situation. But as she left the clinic, her mind was already formulating approaches beyond Orion's awareness: protective measures, contingency plans, the quiet deployment of resources that only someone with her wealth and influence could command. She had spent years building walls around her vulnerability. Now, unexpectedly, she found herself constructing defenses around someone else's. At Nexus headquarters, Callista moved through the day with mechanical precision, her external performance flawless, even as her thoughts remained divided between corporate obligations and the morning's revelations. The VerdTech merger documents awaited her signature, the board eagerly anticipating closure on the deal that would cement Nexus's market dominance for years to come. The numbers made perfect sense. The strategy was sound, yet something held her back: a growing discomfort with decisions made purely for growth and profit without consideration of human impact. Late in the afternoon, Corbin appeared in her office doorway, his expression conveying confidence that his intervention with Orion had already produced results. "I've scheduled the final merger call for tomorrow morning. Vertitech is on board with the revised terms. Legal has cleared the last hurdles. We should be ready to announce by market open." Callista looked up from her screen, her face unreadable. "The merger decision has been postponed. I've identified some integration issues that require further analysis." Corbin's confidence faltered, a flicker of confusion crossing his features before he regained control. "What integration issues?" "We've been over every aspect of this deal for months. The synergies are clear, the redundancies identified. The board is expecting closure. I'm concerned about cultural alignment and long-term retention of key talent. Her voice remained neutral professional. The Verd Tech engineering team has a collaborative approach that may not mesh well with our more directive style. Forcing integration could result in loss of intellectual capital that would undermine the acquisition value. Corbin stepped fully into the office, closing the door behind him. This doesn't sound like you, Callista. Since when do you worry about hurt feelings during an acquisition? We buy companies for their assets and market position, not their corporate kumbaya sessions. Callista's gaze hardened imperceptibly. I'm evolving my approach based on new data. The most successful long-term acquisitions preserve rather than destroy the elements that made the target valuable in the first place. People aren't just lines on a spreadsheet, Corbin. They're the actual value creators. You've been spending too much time with that therapist. Corbin's mask slipped, revealing the calculation beneath. He's filling your head with idealistic nonsense that has no place in this industry. We're not running a charity. Stay away from Orion Hayes. The words emerged with quiet intensity, a CEO's command rather than a request. My personal choices are not subject to your approval or intervention. Interfere with my therapy again, and you'll find yourself explaining to the board why you're surveilling the CEO and attempting to manipulate her medical care. Corbin's expression shifted from surprise to controlled anger. This isn't about therapy, and you know it. This is about you losing objectivity at a critical moment. That man is influencing your business judgment, and I have a responsibility to the company and the shareholders to address that. The conversation ended in stalemate, both maintaining the veneer of professional disagreement while understanding the deeper conflict beneath. Callista recognized the danger in Corbin's position. He had board allies, shareholder relationships, and years of carefully cultivated influence within Nexus. If he chose to make this a public battle, casting her new hesitancy as instability or poor judgment, the damage could be substantial. Yet backing down now, allowing him to dictate her personal choices or force through the merger without proper consideration, felt like surrendering something essential she was only beginning to reclaim. As evening settled over Austin, Callista found herself driving away from the downtown towers, away from her penthouse, following an impulse she didn't fully understand. The city transformed around her, glass and steel giving way to residential neighborhoods, carefully manicured corporate landscapes replaced by live oaks and small businesses. Without conscious decision, she found herself approaching Orion's modest home, its porch light a beacon in the gathering darkness. She sat in her car for long minutes, engine off, watching the warm glow from the windows, catching occasional glimpses of movement inside. Orion and Lyra moving through their evening routine unaware of her presence. The scene conveyed such ordinary peace that it made her chest ache with an emotion she couldn't immediately identify. Not envy exactly, but a sharp awareness of absence, of a kind of richness her wealth had never secured. The decision to approach the house rather than drive away required more courage than any corporate battlefield she'd ever entered. Her knock on the door was tentative, almost hesitant, so unlike her usual confident stride through the world. When Orion appeared, surprise flickering across his features, Callista found herself momentarily speechless, the carefully crafted explanation for her presence evaporating into the night air. I was driving and ended up here. The admission was more vulnerable than she'd intended, revealing the lack of calculation behind her arrival. Orion studied her briefly, noting the unusual discomposition in her normally controlled demeanor. Come in, we're just finishing dinner. There's plenty if you're hungry. The interior of the house wrapped around her like a physical embrace. Warm colors, soft lighting, the lingering scent of home-cooked food. So different from her minimalist penthouse with its empty elegance and perfect surfaces. This place had texture, history, the accumulated evidence of lives actually being lived rather than merely showcased. Lyra looked up from the table, surprise giving way to a gap-toothed smile of recognition. You came to our house. Her delight was unfiltered, a child's straightforward pleasure in the unexpected. We're having spaghetti. Dad makes the sauce from scratch. The normalcy of the moment. A family dinner, a child's simple welcome, the absence of agenda or performance, created a space unlike any Callista had occupied in years. She found herself seated at their table, accepting a plate of pasta, engaging in Lyra's chatter about school projects and soccer victories with genuine interest rather than polite tolerance. The knot of tension that had taken residence between her shoulder blades since the confrontation with Corbin began to loosen, not dissolve, but temporarily set aside in this pocket of ordinary human connection. Later, after Lara had gone to bed with a shy hug for their visitor that left Callista momentarily stunned, Orion brought tea to the living room, where books, toys, and the ever-present telescope parts created a landscape of comfortable disorder. Callista found herself recounting the confrontation with Corbin, the merger complications, the growing gap between the business paradigm she'd always followed and the questions now arising in her mind. Orion listened without offering immediate solutions or judgments, creating space for her to articulate thoughts still taking shape. It's not that I'm suddenly against acquisitions or profit. Those are necessary parts of business growth. But I'm starting to see how the way we execute them can be unnecessarily destructive. We discard people and cultures like they're outdated equipment rather than the actual source of value creation. The realization felt significant, a shift in perspective that had been gradually forming through their therapy sessions and their informal interactions. Orion nodded thoughtfully, connecting her insight to their previous discussions about value and meaning. When I left Meridian, I wasn't just protesting one bad decision about one drug. I was rejecting an entire approach to business that treats people, employees, customers, communities, as resources to be exploited rather than humans to be served. The metrics we use determine the outcomes we create. The conversation flowed into the night, ranging from corporate ethics to personal values, from Callista's isolated childhood in a wealthy but emotionally barren family to Orion's struggle to create security and warmth for Lyra despite limited resources. Two people from seemingly opposite worlds, finding unexpected common ground in their search for an authentic way of moving through life. When Callista finally rose to leave, something had shifted in her relationship with the Hayes household. She was no longer merely a client or a casual acquaintance, but something closer to a friend. Someone who had been welcomed into their private space, who had glimpsed the reality behind the professional facade, who had been trusted with vulnerability and had offered her own in return. Orion walked her to the door, pausing in the soft porch light. Whatever you decide about the merger or about Corbin, make the choice that lets you sleep at night. Not because it's easy or safe, but because it aligns with who you really are, not just who you've been told to be. The words accompanied her back to her penthouse, echoing through her mind as she looked out over the city from her wall of windows. The Austin skyline sparkled below, a glittering testament to ambition and achievement. Yet for the first time, she saw beyond the lights to the lives they represented. Thousands of people with families, hopes, struggles, and connections that couldn't be quantified on any balance sheet. The next morning brought clarity. Callista arrived at Nexus earlier than usual, a decision crystallized during the night's reflection. She summoned her most trusted engineers and security team, bypassing normal protocols to ensure absolute confidentiality. The assignment was precise and urgent. Examine the core product architecture for any vulnerabilities or backdoors that could compromise system integrity, particularly any recent changes coinciding with the merger discussions. The team worked through the day, reporting directly to Callista rather than through normal management channels. By late afternoon, they had found what she suspected might exist: a subtle but significant security vulnerability introduced in the last code update, one that would allow privileged access to user data under specific conditions. More damning, the audit trail linked the changes to Corbin's technical team, implemented outside the normal code review process. Callista reviewed the evidence carefully, understanding its implications. Corbin hadn't just been pushing for the merger. He had been creating leverage, a potential crisis that would force her hand if persuasion failed. The discovery confirmed her growing intuition that something about the VerdTech deal wasn't as straightforward as it appeared. But it also created a dangerous inflection point. Confronting Corbin with this evidence would trigger open warfare within Nexus leadership, potentially destabilizing the company and exposing vulnerabilities to competitors and markets. Before she could determine her next steps, her assistant interrupted with urgent news. Corbin had called an emergency board meeting for the following morning, citing concerns about executive decision-making and strategic direction. The move was a direct challenge to her authority, a preemptive strike designed to outflank her growing hesitation about the merger. The battle lines were being drawn, forcing her hand before she was fully prepared to engage. That evening, as Callista prepared for the coming confrontation, her phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. A series of photographs appeared on her screen. Lyra walking home from school, Orion leaving the clinic, the two of them at a grocery store. The accompanying message was simple. Reconsider your position on the merger. Some matters are too important for distraction. Cold fury washed through her, followed by a wave of protective anger unlike anything she'd experienced in business conflicts. This wasn't corporate gamesmanship anymore. This was a threat against a child, against someone who had shown her nothing but innocent welcome. The line Corbin had crossed changed everything, transforming a professional disagreement into something much more personal and dangerous. Her first instinct was to call Orion to warn him about the implied threat to Lyra. But as her finger hovered over his contact, she hesitated. Involving him directly would only increase the danger, giving Corbin more ammunition to claim inappropriate influence. Instead, she made a different call to her head of security, a former FBI agent who had transitioned to corporate work after years in protective details. I need surveillance and protection for two individuals starting immediately. Discreet but comprehensive. Full detail on the child, particularly around school and activities. Monitor for any unusual approaches or contacts. The instructions were precise, the protective measures deployed without questions about why the CEO of Nexus was suddenly concerned about the safety of a therapist and his daughter. With Orion and Lyra's security addressed, Callista turned her attention to preparing for the board meeting. Through the night, she worked with her closest advisors, assembling evidence of both the security vulnerability and the surveillance of her personal activities. By morning, she was armed with a comprehensive understanding of the situation and a clear strategy for addressing the threat to her leadership. The Nexus boardroom was a study in muted power, rich wood subtle technology windows overlooking the Austin skyline. Board members filed in with the grave expressions of people anticipating conflict, taking their places around the table with careful neutrality. Corbin arrived last, confidence evident in his stride and the thin smile he offered colleagues as he took his seat opposite Callista at the head of the table. The meeting began with Corbin's presentation, a masterfully constructed narrative about declining focus, questionable priorities, and the critical importance of the Verd-Tech merger to Nexus's future growth. Without directly attacking Callista, he painted a picture of leadership distracted by personal matters, missing key strategic opportunities, putting at risk the company's market position and shareholder value. Several board members nodded along their concerns, visible in furrowed brows and exchanged glances. The momentum seemed to be building in Corbin's favor until Callista rose to respond, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp with focused intensity. Before I address the merger question, I want to share some information the board should be aware of. Her voice was calm, professional, betraying none of the anger that had fueled her night's preparation. Our security team has identified a significant vulnerability in our core platform, one that would allow unauthorized access to user data under specific conditions. She distributed tablets to each board member, displaying the technical documentation and audit trails. What's particularly concerning is that this vulnerability was introduced outside our normal code reviews process by a team reporting directly to our CFO. The implications hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Corbin's expression shifted from confidence to wariness as Callista continued. Additionally, I've become aware of surveillance being conducted on my personal activities, including my medical appointments. She activated the room's main screen, displaying the photographs that had been sent to her phone. This escalated last night to implied threats against uninvolved parties, including a child. The boardroom temperature seemed to drop several degrees as the full implications registered. Callista continued, her tone remaining measured despite the seriousness of the accusations. I believe these actions were taken to pressure me into approving the Verd-Tech merger without appropriate diligence. Which raises the question, why is this particular deal so urgent that it would justify compromising our security and corporate ethics? All eyes turned to Corbin, whose composed facade had begun to crack under the unexpected reversal. This is ridiculous, pure distraction. The security update was routine maintenance. As for these photos, I have no idea where they came from. Probably your therapist friend trying to create drama to increase his influence over you? Callista's expression remained unmoved. The audit trails are clear, Corbin. Your team implemented the changes directly bypassing standard security protocols. As for the surveillance, the investigator you hired wasn't as discreet as you might have hoped. We have financial records linking the payments back to a shell company connected to your personal accounts. The board chairman, a veteran tech executive who had supported Nexus since its early days, leaned forward with grave concern. Corbin, if these allegations have merit, they represent serious violations of company policy and potentially the law. I think we need to pause this discussion and convene our ethics committee immediately. Corbin's control finally slipped, desperation bleeding into his voice. You don't understand. The VerdTech deal isn't just about market share. Shaw Analytics holds a 30% stake in VerdTech, my family's company. This merger would double the value of that investment overnight. I've worked on this for 2 years. Everything was aligned until she started seeing that therapist and questioning every decision. The admission of conflict of interest silenced the room. Board members exchanged shocked glances, the full extent of the deception becoming clear. Callista watched Corbin with something approaching pity beneath her professional exterior. For all his strategic brilliance, he had failed to anticipate that his own desperation would ultimately undermine his position more effectively than any counterattack she could have launched. The meeting ended with Corbin placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation, the VerdTech merger indefinitely postponed, and an emergency security team assigned to address the platform vulnerability. As board members filed out subdued conversations already turning to damage control and public relations strategy, Callista remained at the table, the victory bringing less satisfaction than she had anticipated. What lingered was not triumph, but a profound weariness. With the constant battles, the betrayals, the never-ending vigilance required to maintain her position. She had won this round, protected her company, and by extension, Orion and Lyra. But the cost was a deepened awareness of how fundamentally broken the system had become. People reduced to assets, relationships to transactions, values to variables in a profit equation. As she finally rose to leave the boardroom, her phone chimed with a text message from Orion. Lyra has her science project presentation tonight at school, 7 p.m. She'd love it if you could come. No pressure either way. The simple invitation, free from agenda or obligation, stood in stark contrast to the high-stakes corporate warfare she had just navigated. Without hesitation, she texted back her acceptance, already feeling the weight of the day begin to lift at the prospect of something real, something human waiting at the end of it. The events that followed would later be described in business school case studies as a textbook example of corporate governance failure and recovery. But in that moment, sitting in her office above the Austin skyline, what mattered to Callista was not the corporate narrative, but the personal one. The story of a woman rediscovering parts of herself long sacrificed to success, finding connection in unexpected places, and beginning to imagine a different way of moving through the world than the one she had always known. The elementary school multi-purpose room buzzed with the controlled chaos of science fair night, poster boards balanced precariously on folding tables, proud parents navigating narrow aisles, teachers offering encouragement to nervous students. Callista arrived just as the presentations were beginning, slipping quietly into the back row of chairs. The environment was entirely foreign to her. These community gatherings had never been part of her experience either in childhood or adulthood. Orion spotted her from across the room where he stood with other parents. His brief smile of welcome contained no surprise, as if he had fully expected her to appear, despite the corporate battlefield she'd navigated hours earlier. He made no move to join her, understanding instinctively her need to acclimate to this unfamiliar territory at her own pace. Callista scanned the room until she located Lyra, instantly recognizable by her wild curls and the intensity with which she arranged her project display. The child moved with focused determination, adjusting the position of her model solar system with scientific precision. When she looked up and saw Callista, her face brightened with unguarded delight. She waved enthusiastically, drawing curious glances from nearby parents who wondered about the elegantly dressed stranger receiving such attention from Orion Hayes' daughter. The science presentations proceeded with elementary school earnestness. Volcanoes erupted with baking soda, and vinegar plants, grown in different conditions, were compared electrical circuits powered small motors. Each child explained their project with varying degrees of confidence and accuracy, teachers gently guiding the more nervous presenters through their explanations. When Lyra's turn came, she stood beside her solar system model with surprising poise for a 9-year-old. Her project was more sophisticated than most. Planets accurately scaled and positioned, orbits clearly marked, and most impressive, a small motor allowing the inner planets to rotate around her homemade sun. The engineering showed both careful research and creative problem-solving beyond her years. Lyra explained the relative sizes of planets, their orbital patterns, and the composition of each celestial body with precision and enthusiasm. But when she reached Saturn, clearly her favorite, her scientific recitation transformed into something more personal. I built Saturn with my dad, using parts from our telescope. She pointed to the intricate rings surrounding the small sphere. The real Saturn has thousands of rings made of ice and rock particles. When you look at it through a telescope, it's like seeing something impossible become real right in front of you. Something in the child's wonder resonated deeply with the adults listening. The simple joy of discovery, of seeing beyond one's immediate world to something vast and beautiful, captured in her words the fundamental human drive to explore and understand. For Callista, who had built an empire on technology but somehow lost connection with its purpose, Lyra's perspective was a gentle revelation. After the presentations concluded, parents and children mingled around punch and cookies served on paper plates. Callista remained slightly apart, unsure of her place in this community gathering. Lyra solved this dilemma by rushing over and grabbing her hand, pulling her toward the project display with irresistible excitement. "You came. Did you see Saturn? Dad helped with the motor, but I painted all the planets myself." The girl's uncomplicated happiness at her presence was disarming. In Callista's world, people approached her with calculation, with agendas, with carefully masked intentions. Lyra's straightforward delight required no strategic response, only genuine engagement. "I did see it. Your engineering is impressive. The orbital mechanism especially. How did you calculate the rotation speed?" The question launched Lyra into an enthusiastic explanation of gears and motors and the math she'd learned to make the planets move at relatively accurate speeds. Orion joined them quietly, watching the interaction with thoughtful eyes. Other parents glanced their way occasionally, curiosity evident in their expressions. The elegant stranger engaged in serious conversation with Lyra Hayes was not what anyone expected at an elementary school science fair. When the event concluded, Lyra looked up at her father with hopeful eyes. "Can Callista come for ice cream?" "We always get ice cream after important things." The suggestion created a moment of gentle awkwardness, the child's straightforward invitation colliding with adult complexity. Callista started to demur, aware of the curious glances from other parents, conscious of intruding on what was clearly a father-daughter tradition. But Orion's quiet response shifted the trajectory of the evening. "Traditions can grow to include new people. If Callista would like to join us, she's welcome." The simplicity of his statement contained profound meaning that Lyra couldn't fully grasp, but Callista immediately understood. Traditions, routines of connection and celebration, were not static monuments to be preserved unchanged, but living practices that could evolve and expand. The subtle philosophy embedded in his casual invitation revealed yet another layer of the man she was still coming to know. 20 minutes later, they sat in a local ice cream parlor, Lyra happily demolishing a sundae while recounting every detail of her classmates' reactions to her project. The small shop was filled with families enjoying similar post-event celebrations. Sports uniforms, musical instruments, and science fair materials scattered around various tables. Callista, with her designer outfit and careful composure, should have seemed out of place, yet somehow the ordinary pleasure of the moment encompassed her too. Between bites of ice cream, Lyra looked up at Callista with sudden seriousness. "Are you my dad's girlfriend?" The question landed with the unfiltered directness only children can achieve, cutting through adult pretense and careful boundaries. Orion nearly choked on his ice cream, but Callista met the child's gaze with equal directness. "Your dad and I are friends. I'm also his client. He helps me with some problems I've been having. But mostly we're getting to know each other as people." The honest complexity of the answer satisfied Lyra, who nodded thoughtfully before returning to her ice cream. Orion's expression conveyed both apology and appreciation for Callista's handling of the awkward question. The moment passed, but something had shifted in their tentative three-way connection, an acknowledgement of potential, of possibility, without pressure or expectation. Later that night, Callista stood at her penthouse windows, looking out over the city with new eyes. The distance between her glass fortress and the warm, messy reality of the Hayes household seemed both vast and surprisingly bridgeable. The science fair, the ice cream parlor, the simple tradition of celebrating achievement together, these ordinary experiences had awakened a hunger she had successfully ignored for years. Her phone chimed with a text from the Nexus board chair requesting an early meeting to discuss the aftermath of Corbyn's removal and next steps for the company. The corporate world continued its relentless forward momentum, crises and opportunities interlocking like the gears in Lyra's solar system model. But for the first time, Callista found herself questioning whether the orbit she had maintained for so long was the only possible path or simply the one she had never thought to adjust. The following weeks brought significant change on multiple fronts. At Nexus, Callista led the company through the turbulence of Corbyn's departure with measured transparency. Rather than bearing the security of vulnerability he had created, she directed a comprehensive audit of all systems, publicly acknowledged the issue, and implemented enhanced safeguards. The tech press initially pounced on the story as a potential scandal, but her forthright handling transformed it into a case study in corporate responsibility. Board members who had wavered during Corbyn's challenge now rallied behind her leadership, impressed by both her technical judgment and ethical clarity. The VerdTech acquisition was permanently shelved, replaced by a strategic partnership that preserved both companies' independence while creating collaborative opportunities. Most surprisingly to industry observers, Callista began implementing policies that prioritize sustainable growth and employee well-being alongside traditional metrics of success. In her personal life, changes were equally significant, if less visible to the public. Her therapy sessions with Orion continued evolving from crisis intervention to deeper exploration of patterns and possibilities. The professional boundaries remained clear, but alongside this therapeutic relationship grew a friendship that neither had anticipated, one based on mutual respect and growing understanding. Callista found herself increasingly drawn to the Hayes household, accepting casual invitations to dinners, weekend outings, and Lyra's soccer games. Each visit revealed new dimensions of what family could mean. The comfortable routines, the inside jokes, the unconditional support that flowed between father and daughter. She observed how Orion navigated parenthood with both firm boundaries and gentle flexibility, how he balanced protection with encouraging independence, how he prioritized presence over perfection. For Lyra, Callista's occasional presence became an expected part of their lives, neither questioned nor overly emphasized. The child incorporated this new adult into her world with the adaptability of youth-finding in Callista, both a source of technical knowledge for her scientific interests and a different kind of female energy than she encountered with teachers or friends' mothers. On a crisp Saturday morning in late autumn, Callista arrived at the Hayes home in response to a mysterious invitation from Lyra, delivered via Orion with instructions to wear clothes that can get dirty. She found them in the backyard, Lyra practically vibrating with excitement beside a folding table covered with gardening supplies. "We're planting a garden," Lyra announced, gesturing toward a patch of earth Orion had clearly prepared earlier. "Dad says growing things teaches patience and science at the same time. We're doing vegetables and flowers together because that's how nature works best. Different things helping each other grow." The simple project became an unexpected lesson for Callista, who had never planted anything in her life. Under Lyra's enthusiastic instruction and Orion's quiet guidance, she learned to prepare soil to understand the needs of different plants, to set seedlings at proper depths and distances. Her hands, more accustomed to keyboards and touchscreens, became covered in earth, a visceral connection to something fundamental and necessary. As they worked side by side, Lyra chattered about photosynthesis and pollination, her knowledge surprisingly sophisticated for her age. Orion occasionally added context or gentle corrections, but mostly let his daughter lead the botanical education. When Callista expressed surprise at Lyra's expertise, Orion smiled with quiet pride. "She researches whatever captures her interest. Our library trips usually end with a stack of books on whatever her current passion is. Right now, it's ecosystems and plant biology." The day unfolded with natural ease, gardening giving way to lunch on the porch, then board games when afternoon rain drove them inside. Callista found herself fully present in each moment, her mind not racing ahead to next steps or potential outcomes as it typically did. The constant strategic thinking that had defined her professional success fell quiet, replaced by an awareness of simple pleasures. Lyra's laughter, the smell of rain on warm earth, the comfortable silences that required no filling. Late in the afternoon, when Lyra had disappeared into her room to work on a new project, Orion brought tea to the porch, where Callista sat watching the rain. They existed in companionable silence for several minutes before he spoke. "You've been coming here a lot. spending time with us. I need to check if that's becoming complicated for you, professionally, I mean. The question was gentle but direct, acknowledging the unusual nature of their evolving connection. As Lyra's therapist, Orion was acutely aware of ethical boundaries and the potential for conflicts of interest. His concern reflected not just professional responsibility, but personal integrity, the same quality that had led him to risk everything at Meridian Pharmaceuticals years earlier. Callista considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. I've been thinking about that too. The therapy has been valuable, transformative, really. But this friendship with you and Lyra, she paused, searching for words adequate to express what these visits had come to mean. It's showing me a way of living I never experienced, something real that I don't want to lose. The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable in a way Callista rarely allowed herself to be. Orion nodded slowly, understanding the implications. I could refer you to an excellent colleague for continued therapy, someone with my approach, but without the complications. The suggestion was reasonable, ethical, and considerate. It would create clear boundaries, eliminate potential conflicts, and allow their personal connection to develop without professional constraints. Yet Callista found herself unexpectedly resistant, not yet ready to lose the therapeutic space they had created together. Let me think about it. I don't want to rush this decision. Orion agreed easily, his respect for her autonomy evident in his relaxed posture and open expression. No pressure, just something we should keep discussing as things evolve. Honest conversation prevents larger problems later. The exchange, though brief, represented something profound in Callista's experience. A relationship based on mutual consideration rather than advantage, where difficult topics could be addressed directly without strategic positioning. It was perhaps the most adult interaction she had experienced in years, despite the corporate negotiations and power plays that filled her professional life. As she drove home that evening, rain glistening on the streets of Austin, Callista found herself contemplating evolution, not just of relationships, but of self. The woman who had built Nexus through relentless focus and strategic brilliance was still present, still capable, but no longer the entirety of her identity. Something new was emerging, something that found value in garden dirt, under fingernails, and board games on rainy afternoons. Something that recognized different forms of growth beyond market share and revenue. The change did not go unnoticed within her professional circle. Morgan, her longtime assistant, who had observed Callista through countless corporate battles, commented on the shift during a rare quiet moment between meetings. You seem different, more present, less like you're constantly calculating 3 moves ahead. The observation was accurate but incomplete. Callista was still calculating, still strategic in her business decisions, but the metrics had expanded beyond profit and power to include impact, sustainability, and human cost. Her leadership style remained direct and demanding, but tempered now with greater awareness of the people behind the performance metrics. This evolution manifested most visibly in her handling of a product crisis that emerged in late November. A flaw in Nexus's latest algorithm update created biased outcomes for certain user demographics, not through malicious design but through incomplete testing protocols. When the issue was identified, Callista's response diverged dramatically from industry norms. Rather than issuing carefully worded non-apologies crafted by PR professionals, she addressed the problem with unprecedented transparency. A company-wide email acknowledged the error, explained its technical causes, outlined immediate remediation steps, and most surprisingly accepted personal responsibility as CEO for the oversight. But she went further, using the incident as a catalyst for structural changes in development and testing processes, ensuring broader representation in both technical teams and test data. The approach raised eyebrows throughout the tech industry, where admitting mistakes was typically avoided at all costs. Venture capitalists and industry analysts predicted disaster, stock declines, user exodus, competitor advantage. Instead, Nexus experienced something unexpected: increased user trust, improved employee morale, and even cautious praise from longtime critics. I learned recently that true strength isn't avoiding vulnerability, but acknowledging it honestly and addressing it directly. Callista's statement during a tech conference panel discussing the incident reflected her evolving philosophy. Companies aren't abstract entities. They're collections of humans making decisions that affect other humans. when we forget that we create systems that serve metrics rather than people. The quote spread rapidly through tech circles, becoming something of a rallying cry for a new approach to leadership. Journalists began requesting interviews about her management revolution at Nexus. Industry peers reached out, some skeptical, others curious about the woman who seemed to be rewriting the rules of tech leadership while improving rather than sacrificing performance. Amidst this professional transformation, Callista's connection with Orion and Lyra continued to deepen. The question of their therapeutic relationship remained open, but increasingly strained by the growing personal bond. Something would need to change, both recognized but neither rushed toward resolution, allowing the situation to unfold with careful attention rather than forced decisions. In early December, Callista received an unexpected call from Morgan while reviewing quarterly projections. "A man is here to see you. No appointment. Says his name is Thomas Reed from the Austin Chronicle. Claims it's urgent regarding Orion Hayes." The name meant nothing to Callista, but the mention of Orion sent a chill of concern through her. After Corbin's threats, she remained vigilant about potential dangers to the Hayes family. "Send him to conference room 3. I'll be there in 5 minutes." Thomas Reed proved to be younger than Callista expected, early 30s, casually dressed with the alert eyes of a career journalist. He rose when she entered, extending his hand with professional courtesy. "Miss Rhodes, thank you for seeing me without an appointment. I wouldn't have pushed for an immediate meeting if it weren't time-sensitive." Callista remained standing, maintaining both physical and psychological advantage in the encounter. "What's your interest in Orion Hayes?" The directness of her question seemed to confirm something for Reed, whose expression shifted from professional neutrality to focused interest. "I'm working on a feature about corporate whistleblowers, people who sacrifice careers to expose wrongdoing. Mr. Hayes is a central figure in my research on the Meridian Pharmaceuticals case. His decision to come forward about Exivix saved lives, but the story of what it cost him has never been fully told." Wariness kept Callista's expression neutral, despite her internal relief that this wasn't another threat. "That sounds like a conversation you should be having with Dr. Hayes, not me." Reed nodded slowly, considering his response. "I've been trying to reach him for weeks. He's declined all interview requests. But recent developments make this story particularly relevant right now. Meridian is being acquired by Larson Pharmaceutical. The merger announcement goes public tomorrow. The same executives who buried the Exivix safety data are about to be rewarded with multi-million-dollar packages, while Dr. Hayes is still living with professional consequences of his integrity." The information landed with the weight of unexpected significance. Callista had been so focused on the Corbin situation and her own evolving connection with Orion that she hadn't monitored developments at Meridian. The implication was clear. Without public attention, the corporate narrative would remain unchallenged, wrongdoers rewarded, and Orion's sacrifice forgotten. "Why come to me?" Her question was genuine curiosity overriding caution. Reed met her gaze directly. "Because something is happening at Nexus that defies conventional tech industry wisdom. A CEO acknowledging mistakes, prioritizing ethics alongside profits, creating actual change rather than performative corporate responsibility. Industry gossip says Orion Hayes might be connected to this evolution. I'm interested in exploring how whistleblowers influence corporate culture beyond their immediate impact." The observation was uncomfortably perceptive, hitting close to the complex reality of Orion's influence on her thinking. Yet there was something in Reed's approach, his evident respect for Orion's actions and his genuine interest in systemic change, that felt more aligned with a journalism's better angels than mere scandal-seeking. "Dr. Hayes values his privacy and his daughter's well-being. I respect that." Her response was measured, neither confirming nor denying any connection. Reed nodded in apparent understanding. "What about your story, then? Your recent leadership approach at Nexus represents a significant departure from tech industry norms. Would you be willing to discuss your evolution as a leader? What prompted these changes? What you've learned, where you see this approach leading?" The request presented both opportunity and risk. Public discussion of her changing leadership philosophy could strengthen her position at Nexus, potentially influencing the broader industry. But too much personal disclosure might expose the still fragile connections she was building with Orion and Lyra to unwelcome scrutiny. "I'll consider it. Send your specific questions to my assistant. No promises." Callista ended the meeting with professional courtesy, but clear boundaries, her mind already racing with implications and possibilities that extended beyond her own situation. That evening, she drove to Orion's house without calling ahead, finding him on the front porch grading papers, while Lyra completed homework at the kitchen table visible through the window. His expression showed mild surprise at her unannounced arrival, but immediate concern when he registered her unusual intensity. A reporter came to see me today, Thomas Reed from the Austin Chronicle. He's writing about corporate whistleblowers, specifically the Meridian case. Callista explained Reed's visit and the impending Meridian acquisition, watching Orion's face carefully as he absorbed the information. A complex array of emotions crossed his features, old pain resurfacing, resignation at the injustice, protective concern likely centered on Lyra. My whistleblowing days are behind me. Dredging it all up again won't change anything at Meridian. The system protects itself. The uncharacteristic fatalism in his tone revealed how deeply the experience had wounded him, despite his apparent healing and rebuilding. Callista found herself unexpectedly passionate in response. Systems only protect themselves when we let them operate in darkness. Your story matters, not just what happened, but what came after. How you rebuilt with integrity while they continued their patterns. Orion glanced toward the window where Lyra could be seen concentrating on her homework, her small face scrunched in thought. My priority has always been protecting her from fallout. Media attention, public controversy. It all eventually touches the children involved. She's already lost enough because of my choices. The concern was legitimate, the protective instinct admirable. Yet Callista found herself wondering whether protection sometimes came at the cost of powerful example. Don't you think she deserves to know that her father stood against wrongdoing at enormous personal cost? That integrity isn't just something we talk about, but something we demonstrate even when it hurts. The question hung between them, not accusatory, but genuinely exploratory. Orion considered it with the thoughtfulness that characterized his approach to important matters. Maybe. But that's different from splashing our lives across media just when things have finally stabilized. Callista nodded, acknowledging the legitimate concern. What if there were a way to control the narrative? To tell the story on your terms with appropriate protections for Lyra? As they discussed possibilities, a plan began taking shape, not just regarding the Reed article, but something larger, more systemic, addressing the corporate cultures that punished integrity while rewarding compliance with unethical practices. By the time Lyra joined them on the porch, curious about their intense conversation, the outline of a significant initiative had formed between them. 2 weeks later, Callista stood at a podium in Nexus headquarters' main auditorium, facing journalists from major technology and business publications. The company had announced a press conference regarding a major new initiative generating significant industry speculation. Beside her stood Orion, professionally dressed, but retaining his characteristic calm presence rather than adopting corporate polish. Today, I'm announcing the formation of the Integrity and Innovation Foundation, a new nonprofit organization jointly established by Nexus Technologies and Dr. Orion Hayes. The foundation's mission is threefold: to support corporate whistleblowers facing professional and personal consequences for ethical stands, to advocate for stronger legal protections against retaliation, and to promote corporate cultures where raising ethical concerns is rewarded rather than punished. The announcement generated immediate buzz among the assembled journalists, particularly given Orion's presence. Callista continued outlining the foundation's structure, initial funding commitment from Nexus, and operational independence under a diverse board of directors, including ethics experts, former whistleblowers, and corporate leaders committed to reform. When questions turned to Orion's involvement in his history with Meridian Pharmaceuticals, he spoke with quiet authority about his experience. Not just the decision to expose dangerous practices, but the aftermath of professional exo and personal cost. As he described rebuilding his life around a smaller but more meaningful practice focused on healing rather than profit, the room fell into attentive silence. The cynicism typical of tech journalism temporarily suspended. Success shouldn't be measured only in market capitalization or personal wealth, but in the lives improved, the harm prevented, the integrity maintained when testing comes. His simple statement resonated through the room, its authenticity cutting through the usual corporate rhetoric. Following the press conference, Thomas Reed approached them, recorder in hand, and respect evident in his expression. This is more than I anticipated. Most of my subjects are still fighting just to rebuild their lives. Creating a foundation to help others in similar situations. That's taking the experience and transforming it into systemic change. Orion shook his head slightly. This wasn't my vision initially. It was Callista who saw the potential for something larger than my individual story. I was content with my small practice in raising my daughter. She challenged me to think about broader impact. The exchange captured something essential about their evolving partnership, how Orion's lived experience of ethical choice and its consequences, combined with Callista's strategic vision and organizational resources to create something neither could have achieved alone. The foundation represented not just a professional collaboration, but a synergy of complementary strengths and perspectives. In the days following the announcement, the Integrity and Innovation Foundation received widespread coverage in both technology and mainstream media. The timing proved particularly significant as the Meridian acquisition became public, creating a powerful contrast between executives who had buried safety data being rewarded with millions, while the whistleblower who exposed them had rebuilt his life through quiet service. The narrative resonated beyond business circles, touching on fundamental questions about value, success, and accountability in American corporate culture. Journalists began investigating other whistleblower stories, examining patterns of retaliation and silence across industries. The conversation expanded beyond Orion's specific case to address systemic issues of corporate ethics and individual courage. For Callista, the foundation launch represented both professional evolution and personal alignment, bringing her organizational talents and resources into harmony with emerging values about impact and integrity. Board members who had initially questioned her changing leadership approach now expressed support for initiatives that position Nexus as an industry leader in ethical innovation. The foundation's headquarters would occupy a renovated library building midway between downtown Austin and the eastern neighborhood where Orion's clinic operated, a physical representation of bridging different worlds. The location was deliberately chosen to feel accessible and grounded, rather than imposing with community meeting spaces and resources for those seeking support. As winter settled over Austin, bringing rare cool temperatures and occasional frost, the Hayes household underwent subtle transformation. The half-built telescope was finally completed, taking pride of place on the back porch for stargazing on clear nights. The garden Callista had helped plant showed first signs of growth, winter vegetables pushing through soil with persistent determination. And most significantly, Callista's presence became increasingly regular. Weekend dinners, movie nights, quiet evenings, helping Lyra with science projects, or simply sharing comfortable silence with Orion. The therapeutic relationship had formally ended, Callista transitioning to a respected colleague Orion had recommended. This change eliminated the professional boundary that had constrained their personal connection, allowing something new to develop. Not rushed or pressured, but unfolding with deliberate care and mutual respect. On a clear December evening, with stars sharp against the Texas sky, the three of them gathered on the back porch around the telescope. Lyra bounced with excitement as Orion made final adjustments to the eyepiece, focusing on Saturn's distinctive shape. "It's the clearest we've ever seen it." She stepped back, giving Callista the first look. The moment Callista bent to the eyepiece, something shifted in her understanding of perspective. The planet appeared small, yet perfectly formed rings clearly visible despite the vast distance. Something humans had gazed upon for centuries, still capable of inspiring wonder. She stepped back, strangely moved by the experience of seeing directly what she had only viewed in images before. Orion watched her reaction with quiet understanding. There's something about seeing it directly, isn't there? Not processed through screens or algorithms. Just light traveling across space, meeting your eye. A connection to something ancient and enduring. The observation captured perfectly what had drawn her increasingly to this household, to these people. The direct, unmediated experience of connection that no virtual interaction or corporate achievement could replicate. The simple joy of shared discovery, of being present in a moment with others who valued that presence for itself, not for advantage or calculation. Later, after Lyra had gone to bed, Orion and Callista sat on the porch, the night air cool but not uncomfortable. Their conversation drifted through foundation plans, community responses to the announcement, practical considerations for the coming months. But beneath these topics ran a deeper current, the acknowledgement of something significant developing between them, something neither rushed toward nor avoided. "I've been thinking about moving." Callista's statement emerged naturally from a brief silence. The penthouse never really felt like home. More like a hotel I owned. I'd like something with a yard. Maybe in this neighborhood. The implication was clear without being presumptuous. Not moving in together, but moving closer, creating greater possibility for connection while respecting necessary boundaries and Lyra's needs for stability. Orion considered her words thoughtfully, reading both what was said and what remained unspoken. This neighborhood has good schools, strong community, the kind of place where people know their neighbors. His response acknowledged her underlying meaning while adding practical support to the idea. They sat in companionable silence, the night wrapping around them like a shared blanket. After a while, Orion reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden object, offering it to Callista without explanation. In her palm lay an exquisitely carved wooden piece, half of a constellation carefully shaped from rich dark wood. I've been working on this for a while. It's Lyra, the constellation, not my daughter. He smiled slightly at the distinction. When the two pieces joined, they formed the complete pattern. The craftsmanship was beautiful, each star position precisely rendered the wood polished to a soft glow. The gift represented something profound, not just artistic skill, but meaningful symbolism. Two parts forming a whole, stars connected in pattern rather than isolation. The constellation that shared his daughter's name, binding together their evolving story. Callista ran her fingers over the smooth surface, feeling the care embedded in each detail. The other half, her question, was soft understanding, the symbolic weight of the moment. Orion held up the matching piece, its edges perfectly aligned to connect with what she held. Not quite ready yet, still needs some finishing, but it's taking shape. The gentle metaphor acknowledged their ongoing journey, something still developing, being carefully crafted, moving toward completion without artificial acceleration. Callista closed her fingers around the wooden stars, the tangible symbol of connection warming in her palm. After a lifetime of digital interfaces and virtual interactions, the physical reality of handcrafted wood felt profoundly grounding. Something real she could hold, evidence of care and intention made manifest through patient work. The night deepened around them, stars wheeling overhead in ancient patterns. Below, Austin continued its urban rhythms, a city of ambition and ease, technology and tradition, constantly reinventing itself while honoring its roots. Somewhere in that balance between achievement and connection, innovation and enduring values, lay the path they were beginning to walk together. Not as CEO and therapist, not as billionaire and whistleblower, but simply as two people who had found in each other something authentic and meaningful. A recognition that true wealth lay not in empires of data and algorithms, but in the courage to be vulnerable, the willingness to grow, and the capacity to build something lasting from the raw materials of integrity and care.